Statue of Liberty is one of the most instantly recognizable symbols of America. Essentially, the statue is the personification of an idea, democracy, but it also celebrates freedom, justice, equality, and the aspiration for a better life. To bring Lady Liberty's influence into our lives during these troubling political times, her underlying spiritual principles need to be understood. The statue is modeled after the Roman goddess Liberty, or Libertas, while its design is based on the Colossus of Rhodes, which represented the Greek sun god Helios. While the statue was a gift from the people of France to the people of the USA in recognition of their friendship and their joint commitment to democracy, it was conceived, financed, built, and installed by Freemasons. As is to be expected, the Freemasons encoded messages in the statue, including multiple references to the number 7. This suggests a closely related sun god would be more appropriate for calling in Lady Liberty. In this workshop, we'll discover which sun god we should be calling on to bring in Lady Liberty and how we should go about it. The Statue of Liberty, which towers 305 feet 6 inches over New York Harbor, is one of the most instantly recognizable symbols of America. It has inspired countless souvenir replicas and has been referenced in everything from posters for war bonds to scenes in various movies. Emma Lazarus's poem, The New Colossus, which was read at a fundraising art exhibition in 1883, and 2 decades later was inscribed on a bronze plaque on the inner wall of the pedestal, includes the plea, "Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free." Magnuson Kennedy, supervising ranger for the National Park Service, told the Raising the Torch podcast, "The Statue of Liberty was really of the people, in that the people of the United States and the people of France, not the super wealthy, not the super powerful, it was everyday folks contributing to the fundraising efforts and paying for the Statue of Liberty and the pedestal. The statue was paid for by the people of France, not their government, as a gift to the people of America, while the pedestal was paid for by the people of America, not our government." The statue was more than just a celebration of American democracy. It became linked with the waves of immigrants arriving in America in the late 1800s and their aspirations for a better life, as it was the first thing they saw sailing in. It was a beacon of hope. The statue became an even more prominent American symbol during World War I, when it became one of the last sights that United States soldiers gazed upon as they sailed off to fight in Europe, as well as one of the first things they glimpsed when they finally returned home. Essentially, the statue is the personification of an idea, democracy, but it also celebrates freedom, justice, equality, and the aspiration for a better life. Nearly 100 years after the end of the American Revolution in 1865, French political thinker and brother Édouard de La Boulaye, who belonged to Lodge Alsace-Lorraine in Paris, proposed to France that the country gift a monument to the United States in commemoration of their diplomatic relations and to celebrate a century of freedom and democracy. Additionally, Brother La Boulaye and his comrades, which included sculptor and Freemason Frederick Auguste Bartholdi, had hoped that the gift would inspire their own French citizens to pursue democracy in France. At the time, France's population was still split between those who supported the monarchy and those who supported Enlightenment ideals. The structural framework was provided by fellow Freemason and French civil engineer Gustave Eiffel, who would later become famous for designing the Eiffel Tower. Copper was chosen as the material of choice by Brother Bartholdi, as it was among the least expensive materials to construct with. That statue was then built by Freemason laborers of the Franco-American Union and was completed in 1885. Lady Liberty was then dismantled into 350 pieces and shipped overseas, arriving at Bedloe's Island, soon to be renamed to Liberty Island in June 1885. When the cornerstone for the Statue of Liberty was laid, elements of a traditional Masonic ceremony were observed. A Grand Master provided a few words, and the cornerstone was found to be square, level, and plumb. The Grand Master applied the mortar and had the stone lowered into place. He then struck the stone 3 times and declared it duly laid. Then the elements of consecration were presented: corn, wine, and oil. The remaining pieces of Lady Liberty were finally placed, and the monument was dedicated on October 28, 1886. President Grover Cleveland presided over the ceremony, and Brother Henry Potter, the Episcopal Bishop of New York, gave the invocation. Brother Bartholdi pulled the tricolour French flag off the statue's face. The main address was given by Freemason Chauncey M. Depew, who was also a United States Senator. The legacy of these people was to encode messages in the building of the Statue of Liberty. French sculptor Frederick Auguste Bartholdi proposed a monumental figure of a robe-clad woman representing Egypt during the construction of the Suez Canal in Egypt in the 1850s. While Egypt rejected the idea as too costly, Bartholdi's initial vision of an Arab peasant evolved into one of a colossal goddess that he'd later apply to a Statue of Liberty design. Bartholdi had studied ancient classical figures of massive proportions. The statue of Helios, also known as the Colossus of Rhodes, influenced his plans for the eventual construction of Libertas, the subject of the Statue of Liberty. Bartholdi was ultimately not commissioned for the work due to budgetary constraints, but he revisited these early models when designing what is now known as the Statue of Liberty, formerly entitled Liberty Enlightening the World, which he proposed as a celebration of the centennial of the United States Declaration of Independence. In 1876, French craftsmen and artisans started construction of the statue in France using Bartholdi's design. The National Park Service confirms that the statue was modeled after the Roman goddess Liberty, or Libertas, and stating that classical images of liberty are often depicted in the female form. The broken chains near the statue's feet, the National Park Service states, likely represent breaking free from tyranny and servitude. By 1884, the entire statue was completed and put together in Paris, while construction workers, many of whom were recent immigrants, began building the statue's pedestal on Bedloe's Island in New York Harbor. The workers who reassembled the statue once it arrived in New York were also largely new immigrants. The important points are that the statue represents the Roman goddess Liberty, or Libertas, and is based on the Colossus of Rhodes, which represented the Greek sun god Helios. It has previously been stated that Lady Liberty celebrates freedom, justice, democracy, and the aspiration for a better life. These things are just as important now as they were when she was first conceived. To bring her influence into our lives, the spiritual principles encoded within her need to be understood. This is an absolutely magnificent close-up photo of Lady Liberty's face. You can make out 6 of the spikes coming out from her crown. Sadly, the 7th spike is hidden. You can clearly see the incredible attention to detail and what an amazing piece of art this is. The torch is described by the National Park Service as lighting the way to freedom, showing us the path to liberty. The crown chosen by Bartholdi was a spiked diadem or aureole, like that seen in classical images of Helios, the Greek sun god. The official librarian of the Statue of Liberty National Monument says it's a halo, or what in art is called a nimbus, showing she is divine. The robe is actually a stola and pella, which means gown and cloak, which are common in depictions of Roman goddesses such as Libertas. The 7 spikes or rays of her crown have been proposed to represent either the 7 continents or the 7 seas of the world. The 25 windows in the crown, according to the National Park Service, represent gemstones found on the earth. The broken shackles and axe head at the feet of Lady Liberty represent the throwing off of tyranny and oppression. The National Park Service writes that the statue collectively symbolizes American independence and the end of all types of servitude and oppression. The tablet of law, a tabula ansata, in Lady Liberty's left hand, is inscribed with July 4th, 1776, to recognize the creation of the United States of America. The shape of the tablet is a keystone, which is an architectural stone that keeps the others together. The National Park Service observes that the keystone of this nation is the fact that it is based on law, and without law, freedom and democracy would not prevail. Lady Liberty's long second toe is a nod to her heritage. Lady Liberty has so-called Greek feet, where the second toe is longer than the big toe. Some scholars think sculptor Bartholdi gave her Greek feet as a way of defining her heritage from the earliest days of civilization, since it was an aesthetic preference for showing off sandaled feet by makers of ancient Greek statuary. For the record, foot-shaped genealogy is a concept out of the 19th century that proposes that the shape of your foot can tell you one of 5 ethnic groups for which your ancestors belonged. The groups were Celtic, Greek, Egyptian, Germanic, and Roman. Libertas is a Roman goddess, so perhaps there is an inference that there is a Greek influence we need to consider. Perhaps it's a tip of the hat to Helios being a Greek god. Lady Liberty is not standing still, but is walking. This is said to be symbolic of leading the way and lighting the path to liberty and freedom. There's an aesthetic reason for her stride as well. Bartholdi described in his original patent that the right leg with its lower limb thrown back is bent, resting upon the bent toe, thus giving grace to the general attitude of the figure. Lady Liberty encodes the number 7 numerous times. There are 7 spikes or rays on the crown. The number of windows in the crown below the spikes is 25. Summing the digits, 2 plus 5 equals 7. There are 16 leaves around the torch. Summing the digits, 1 plus 6 equals 7. The height of the statue can be rounded to 151 feet tall. Summing the digits, 1 plus 5 plus 1 equals 7. The pedestal was made separately and so is less relevant, but it has 4 Grecian columns on each side, making a total of 16. Summing the digits, 1 plus 6 equals 7. Libertas is Latin for liberty or freedom, and is the Roman goddess and personification of liberty. She was sometimes featured on coins. She was usually portrayed as a matron with 2 accoutrements, the rod and the soft pileos, which she holds out rather than wears. The pileos was a brimless felt cap worn in a number of countries, including ancient Greece, and was later introduced in ancient Rome. The pileos was given to freed slaves, and hence was a symbol of liberty. While the symbolism of the pileos would have been immediately apparent to Romans, its meaning has been lost, so a substitution makes a lot of sense. Libertas was sometimes portrayed with a laurel wreath. This should be kept in mind. I was unable to find an invocation to Libertas, but there's nothing stopping people from writing their own, should they choose to do so. It was previously stated that Lady Liberty has so-called Greek feet, suggesting that we should look towards her Greek origins. We know that the Lady Liberty statue was based on the Colossus of Rhodes. Here we have a couple of coins depicting Libertas. On the left, we have Libertas holding a rod and holding out a pileos. On the right, we have a denarius dated 42 BCE, issued by Cassius Longinus and Lentulus Spinther, depicting the crowned head of Libertas with a sacrificial jug, and litus, which is a crooked wand on the reverse. Helios was particularly worshipped at Rhodes, the largest of the Dodecanese islands of Greece in the eastern Mediterranean. There he was the most important deity, their patron god, and honoured at the Haliea festival, the highlight of the island's religious festival, and a pan-Hellenic games, much like the ancient Olympic Games. The man commissioned with the Herculean task of sculpting the giant Helios was Hades of Lindus, which was a city on Rhodes. The project would not be finished until around 280 BCE, and as the 1st century CE Roman writer Pliny the Elder noted, it cost 300 talents and took at least 12 years to complete the bronze figure, which stood some 70 cubits, or 33 meters, or 108 feet high. It is likely that the bronze outer shell, presumably applied in sheets and assembled on site, was supported by internal struts made of iron, and certain pieces were weighted with stones to increase the figure's stability. This is a speculative representation of the Colossus of Rhodes statue. It comes from a 19th century engraving by Sidney Barclay. Although Helios was usually envisaged and represented in art as a charioteer with a sun-beamed halo riding across the sky and dragging the sun behind him, the Rhodians perhaps went for a more statuesque representation for their colossal figure. Unlike many other super-famous sculptures from antiquity, though, there are no surviving representations or scale models of the Colossus in other ancient art forms to help reconstruct in detail what the Colossus may have looked like. The base of the statue carried the following inscription, which is preserved in the ancient anthology of poetry, the Palatine Anthology. To you, Helios, yes to you, the people of Dorian Rhodes raised this Colossus high up to the heaven, after they had calmed the bronze wave of war and crowned their country with spoils won from the enemy. Not only over the sea, but also on land, they set up the bright light of unfettered freedom. The Colossus, along with many other structures on Rhodes, was toppled by an earthquake in either 228 or 226 BCE. According to the Greek geographer and writer Strabo, who lived from around 64 BCE to 24 CE, in his text Geography, the statue snapped at the knees and then lay forlorn and untouched, because the locals believed the great oracle of Delphi's prediction that to move it would bring misfortune on the city. Its massive broken pieces cluttered the docks of Rhodes for a millennium before being melted down as scrap in the mid-7th century CE. This indicates that to the people of Rhodes, Helios represented freedom, peace from war, and doubtless a time of prosperity. It's also important to note that nobody knows what the Colossus actually looked like, but it can be inferred that it would have been similar to other representations of Helios. Helios was the Titan god of the sun, a guardian of oaths, and the god of sight. He dwelt in a golden palace in the river Okeanos, at the far ends of the earth, from which he emerged each dawn, crowned with the aureole of the sun, driving a chariot drawn by 4 winged steeds. When he reached the land of the Hesperides in the far west, he descended into a golden cup, which bore him through the northern streams of Okeanos, back to his rising place in the east. Helios was identified with several other gods of fire and light, such as Hephaestus, the Olympian god of fire, smiths, craftsmen, metalworking, stonemasonry, and sculpture, as well as light-bringing Phoebos Apollon. Here we have a magnificent relief sculpture featuring Helios in his chariot drawn by his 4 steeds. It was excavated at Troy in 1872 and is currently in the State Museums of Berlin. As is obvious, there are many more than 7 spikes or rays on his crown. While Helios is normally portrayed wearing a crown from which there are numerous rays, there is one, admittedly late text, which insists that there should be 7 rays, which would tie him in with the Statue of Liberty. This, however, is not reflected in most representations we have from him. It comes from Nonnus Dionysiaca, which was a Greek epic produced around the 5th century CE. He, Helios, placed the golden helmet of the sun on Phaethon's head and crowned him with his own fire, winding the 7 rays like strings upon his hair, and put the white kilt girdle-wise round him over his loins. He clothed him in his own fiery robe and laced his foot into the purple boot, and gave his chariot to his son. As a point of interest, Plato informs us in his Symposium and other works that many people, including Socrates, would greet the sun and offer prayers each day. If you feel that you'd like to work with Helios and bring in the energy of Lady Liberty, you'd be working with him on Sunday, which is the day of the sun. You'd use frankincense as your incense and the color gold, perhaps via yellow candles. As a suggestion, Homeric Hymn 31 to Helios can be used to invoke him. It is a little troubling that while Helios is Greek, which fits the clue of Lady Liberty having Greek feet, he does not tie in with the encoded number 7. Perhaps another Greek sun god should be considered. Previously it was stated that Helios was identified with several other gods of fire and light, including light-bringing Phobos Apollon. Apollon, commonly referred to as Phobos Apollon, Phobos meant shining or radiant, and referred to his function as a god of light or the sun, was the son of Zeus and the goddess Leto, the twin brother of Artemis, and the god of the sun, presiding over prophecy and oracles, music and poetry, archery, healing, plague, purification, and the protection of young boys. He was comfortable with both his silver bow and his lyre. He was described as the most Greek of the gods. He was depicted as a handsome beardless youth with long hair, but a youth elevated to its ideal, which was manifest in the divine. His symbols included the sun, a wreath and branch of laurel, bow and quiver, raven, lyre, dolphin, wolf, swan, and mouse. The Apollo Belvedere, a celebrated marble sculpture from classical antiquity, thought to be an original Roman recreation of Hadrianic date, which would make it around 120 to 140 CE. From the mid-18th century, it was widely considered the epitome of aesthetic perfection. It really is quite a breathtaking piece of art. It is important to note that in Homeric literature, Apollon was clearly identified as a plague dealer with a silver bow and no solar features whatsoever. By Hellenistic times, Apollon had become closely connected with the sun in cult, and Phobos, the epithet most commonly given to Apollon, was later applied by Latin poets to the sun god's soul. The number 7 was sacred to Apollon. He was believed to have been born on the 7th of the lunar month. According to some traditions, he was a 7-month child. On the 7th of every lunar month, sacrifices were offered to him, and his festivals usually fell on that day. The Homeric hymn to Hermes has a description of Apollon's lyre. It has a sound box made from a tortoise shell. The lyre could be made with up to 7 strings, and many, but not all, representations feature 7 strings. It was previously stated that Libertas was sometimes portrayed as a matron with a laurel wreath. Laurel leaves and wreaths are also tied in with Apollon. The celebrated Oracle of Apollon at Delphi has an ancient temple complex which dates back at least 2,700 years and was known throughout ancient Greece. The sanctuary's priestess, or Pythia, would go into a trance state after chewing laurel leaves and inhaling subterranean vapors. Apollon was represented wearing a laurel wreath on his head, and wreaths were awarded to victors in athletic competitions, including the ancient Olympics. It appears Apollon is the closest fit, as by late antiquity he had been conflated with Helios, thus inheriting all his solar attributes. The number 7 is sacred to him and occurs repeatedly on the Statue of Liberty. Both he and Libertas were portrayed with laurel wreaths. If you feel that you'd like to work with Apollon to bring in the energy of Lady Liberty, you'd be invoking him on Sunday, which is the day of the sun, you'd use either frankincense or laurel as your incense, and the color gold, perhaps via yellow candles. Be mindful of the attributes of Lady Liberty you wish to bring in, and you can use the wonderful hymn below. While it's great to understand every single word in the hymn, it's not absolutely essential, because at the end of the day, it's the intention and willpower that are of primary importance. Orphic Hymn 34 for Apollon. Come, blessed Paean, slayer of Tityos, O Phoebos, Lycoreus, god of Memphis, bright famed giver of wealth, crying, Eer! With a golden lyre, herdsman, lord of seeds, Pythios, Titan, Grineos, Smintheus, slayer of Python, and Delphic prophet, wild, lovely, light-bringing daemon, renowned youth, you lead the Musai in choral dance, flinging far arrows from a bow, holy Finduan, Didymeos, Loxias working from afar, Lord of Delos. The eye sees all and brings light to mortals. Gold-haired, you reveal accurate oracular words. Hear me, praying for the people, and have a kindly heart. For you see the boundless aether and the rich earth from up above. And through the dead of night, in still silence, under starry-eyed darkness, you perceive the roots below. You hold the cosmic bounds. You have concern for the first and the last. Decked with flowers, you harmonize the poles with your quick-striking lyre, arriving now at the highest string, then turning downward to the lowest ones in the Doric mode. Balancing the poles, you draw distinctions between living nations. In harmony, you measure a common share to people, an equal mix of winter and summer for each of them, and you pick out the notes, the lowest with winter and the highest for summer. In the Doric mode, you play for spring's much-loved and flowery season. For this, mortals celebrate you in song and call you Lord and Pan, the two-horned god, who sends forth the whistling songs of the winds. Wherefore you hold the seal of the cosmos. Hear, blessed one, the initiates cry, supplicants, for you to be their saviour. This translation was taken from Patrick Dunn's book, The Orphic Hymns. YouTube has a selection of reconstructions of ancient Greek music, including the First Delphic Hymn to Apollo and the Second Delphic Hymn to Apollo. If you resonate with one of these, they could be readily incorporated into ritual work with Apollon. Here's one example. It's the hymn to Pythian Apollo, performed by Bettina Joy de Guzman and Thanasis Klopas. Wow, you actually made it through to the last slide. So, if you want any more information, please consult the blog on which this video is based. The details are listed below.